All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Scientists Talking About Science Fiction. We're just gonna have a little chat here about we're all fans of science fiction, whether TV shows or movies or books, all of the above. But inevitably, as a scientist, you see things that you go, "Oh, wait, that's not how that's supposed to be," or things that you really like and that really get you excited. So we're going to talk about some of those things. And since we're all from different fields, we have a lot of different perspectives on the matter. We can all go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Georgia. I'm a PhD student at University of Michigan, and I'm an evolutionary biologist. I also study wildlife. Deanna?
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me here, Georgia. My name is Diana. I'm a postdoctoral researcher currently in Belgium. My focus is cosmology, which means I study all things inside the universe, well, not small things, but just the universe and everything happening inside the universe. And I'm a huge sci-fi fan, so I'm happy to be here and go on all my rants of all my pet peeves about sci-fi films. And the good things too, of course.
So my name's Ian McLaughlin, and I have a PhD in neuroscience, which means that I studied some of the smaller parts of the universe. And my research focused on mapping out some of the neurobiology of addiction and anxiety using transgenic models and viruses, engineered viruses, and chemogenetics and optogenetics. And my gateway drug. I am a neuropharmacologist at heart, so my gateway drug to science was science fiction. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's a great idea.
And I'm David Dunn. I teach astronomy at a community college near Sacramento, but I did get a PhD in astronomy and a planetary scientist, actually. So I'm a little closer to home than Deanna is. So.
Okay, and it looks like we have some people here. Hi, Swift Beats. Thanks, Christian, for the Super Clap Award. Christian, I just invited you to join us if you'd like. So come on in, and Abyss, I'll invite you too. Hi. Maybe we could. Let's see. Maybe we could go around and just say real quick what a couple of your favorite science, or like how did you get into science fiction? I guess. My kind of like gateway was as a kid. My parents always watched this show called Red Dwarf, which was like a sci-fi comedy show. And I'll definitely be talking about it more later, but it's basically about a guy that gets frozen in time, and by the time he wakes up millions of years later, the whole rest of the human race is dead, so he's the last person. But despite all that, it's funny, I swear. Anyways, he spends his life drinking beer and eating curry alone on this spaceship.
So like normal life, pretty much.
Yeah, kind of. He was kind of my hero. I think I was in kindergarten when I started watching this. I didn't know what curry was, but I knew he always had like curry stains on his shirt and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. How about let's go to David. What sci-fi do you really like?
Okay, so go back in my day, back in the 70s when Star Trek was rerunning. My brother was a big fan of science fiction and science and so forth, so I kind of followed him. But Star Trek was my big thing. Watched the reruns again and again and again and again, and was kind of hungry for more. And eventually got into a little bit of Battlestar Galactica, the original series in the 70s and 80s, and then when Star Trek Next Generation came, it's been sort of continuous Star Trek since then. As we were saying before, I do like The Expanse a lot, a little Star Wars here and there, but I'd say Star Trek was kind of my base for science fiction. And Doctor Who too. I should mention I did watch Doctor Who in the 80s when it was on PBS, our public broadcasting system. They show the British version of it, all reruns. John Pertwee and Tom Baker, so Doctors 3 and 4. So I got into it back then.
Yeah, I love watching Star Trek reruns. And Paul has a great question for the audience, for the people in the audience. What are your favorite science fiction movies? Maybe other shows or books too. But Ian, shows that you like.
So probably the way I was introduced to science fiction was my brother was he had a pretty substantial library of like trashy science fiction and then like high science fiction and everything in between. I started with more fantasy, like Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, these kinds of things. And then Dune was sort of like the first series that I really, really dove into. And, I can actually say the reason I wanted to have kids when I was like 16 was because of Dune. It's kind of a ridiculous thing to say out loud, but then I got into the Sprawl series by William Gibson. The most famous of which being Neuromancer, which was really, I think, the kind of the predecessor to The Matrix, and The Matrix is certainly one of my favorite movies. I also really dug Asimov's Robot series, which actually started out as a series of, you might, if you're unfamiliar with the book or the books, you might be familiar with the Will Smith movie, which was, sort of inspired by Asimov's I, Robot series. Started as short stories, which I thought were just really interesting treatments of extrapolations, right? That's what science fiction is. You're extrapolating a concept using science. Gattaca, certainly was one of my favorite movies. I was actually filmed. The Gattaca building was a building that was close to where I went to college, believe it or not. Brave New World, Blade Runner, do androids sleep? Do androids dream of electric sheep? Philip K. Dick in general. And then, Ex Machina, I thought was a really excellent movie, probably the best recent movie about artificial intelligence. And then if anybody's interested in like a newer book that I think does a good job of like neuroscience informed science fiction, Recursion, it's a little bit, it's simple, it's on the simple side, but it also is a reasonably accurate extrapolation involving neuroscience. But okay, I've already gone on for too long. And I'm a huge fan of the new Battlestar Galactica series. In fact, just a couple of days ago, David, sometimes I play stuff in the background that's just sort of like soul food, that just feels good while I'm working. And I was playing interviews of like the cast of Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, huge fan.
Good series, yeah.
So in my case, I can actually directly blame my parents for my love of sci-fi because I am actually named after Deanna Troi from Star Trek. So it's a true story. I am named after Deanna Troi. So I was kind of destined to go into sci-fi and science. And growing up, there was so much sci-fi on in my place. My parents always watched a lot of sci-fi, and Stargate was a big influence for me, especially Samantha Carter, the astrophysicist. She was a big inspiration for me, actually. That show was all throughout my childhood. Farscape was also up there. And then I actually got into Firefly and Doctor Who quite late. And now I'm a huge Firefly and Doctor Who nerd. Love those shows. Yeah, pretty much I'm much more towards shows and movies and books. Books just because I don't actually read for pleasure anymore. Academia's killed my pleasure for reading. But I'm much more for shows. And most recently, I really, really enjoyed watching 12 Monkeys. I'd heard many good things about 12 Monkeys. And if you haven't seen the series, I really recommend it. The movie is good, the series is phenomenal.
So it looks like Abyss is here. Abyss, can I bring you in? How did you get into sci-fi?
Oh wow. Where to begin, right? Yeah. I mean, I've been generally curious about sci-fi um, probably when I started watching the Star Wars series, because like it generally captivated me to kind of realize a world that's probably futuristic in a way, um, and also like if you just like move aside from like the force kind of thing, and I was always curious about like how things hover, how things would fly, and that generally captivated me. I guess like that was probably my indoctrination to the sci-fi world. I did enjoy Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, which some say that it's actually the kind of like the predecessor to the Matrix. And like Ian, the Matrix actually hugely reshaped my conception about virtual reality, and the whole philosophical bend of like where to kind of designate the conscious input to something akin to like simulated world. But that's probably it. But when it comes to books though, I really recommend people read the Three Body Problem book series by Ching Su Lu. He's a very good Chinese science fiction author. In fact, like um, it actually broke through most most of the the book series that was heavily dominated by the Western world when it comes to the science fiction genre. So that was actually had a profound effect on me, and I think like even Obama itself actually really liked the book, and he put it in his top 10 list. So yeah, and among the recent movies, I liked Arrival. So that gave me a whole new insight as to how to encode information and how we can essentially wire our brain. But we could talk about that for if detail is warranted. But yeah, those are pretty much my science fiction influences.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Thank you. And thank you everyone for commenting about your favorite shows and sci-fi things. Christian with Space Odyssey and Angus with Interstellar, and Frankman has a bunch of good suggestions. Yeah, Blade Runner, Philip K. Dick. And yeah, it's really cool to hear. Alec864, yeah, I definitely agree. Firefly, it's sad. It ended too soon. I think everybody that saw it agrees. But yeah, cool. Hello, everybody. So I think one of the things that maybe we can move into like what we see from our different respective fields as scientists that real often comes up maybe in sci-fi. So for me, it's definitely, I'm an evolutionary biologist. I do a lot with genetics, and like there's a couple things, and also people in the audience too. If you have questions for us or things that you wonder about, put it in the chat. But yeah, with me, it's like there's a lot of strange evolution things that happen. So things evolve in weird ways. First of all, there's like, well, I'm just going to share this one picture real quick. And this is from, I hate to pick on this. I hate to pick on this show. I love Star Trek Voyager. It's my favorite of the Star Treks. But for example, this episode, this man, he for some reason he travels like too fast. He breaks some warp speed barrier, and it causes a genetic mutation, and he starts devolving. And over the course of the episode, he basically turns into a lizard, which. And not only that, he also somehow turns the captain into a lizard, and they have babies together. But that's beyond the point. But so like this de-evolution, an individual just like morphing into another animal is not like evolution. And I can see how people would think that, because when we think about things messing with our genetics, like genetic mutations and stuff, and the fallout of terrible things like atomic bombs and stuff like that, we think of like, oh, people have physical signs, they physically change, they have radiation burns or signs of disease. That's very different than turning into a lizard. Like this guy's skull has changed. Okay, that your formation of your skull is something that happens like during your period of development in the womb. So just because like your genetic code for like, oh, make a different type of skull changes, well, that part of your genetic code has already been expressed. Your body has already been formed sort of as it is. And so that just like doesn't happen. So I'll get rid of that. But that's like one of my big pet peeves. But do other people have things they really like or really don't like that they see come up?
I have so many. The thing is, there are so many sci-fi shows set in space. On pretty much every sci-fi show gets space wrong. So it's very easy to have a lot of pet peeves. I know David has them as well about how things happen in space. We've all heard the phrase, nobody can hear you scream in space. And we're all fine with that. But then we also somehow expect that big explosions can both take place in space and be heard in space. And if you were to actually have an explosion in space or an epic space battle, it would be completely silent, which obviously doesn't make for good movies, so they can't do that. But it would be completely silent. And the most damaging part of an explosion is often the shockwave. And the shockwave can't travel in a vacuum. Space is a vacuum, so shockwaves can't travel. So if you consider the well-known scene in Star Wars when the Death Star gets blown up, every time the Death Star gets blown up, you have this huge shockwave coming out, blast, like lots of flashing lights, lots of debris flying everywhere. And that is just so unrealistic. And of course, it's played for the effect of it. But then there's also other things that are not considered there. That if you did blow up a Death Star, there's going to be a lot of shrapnel. Because there's no atmosphere, no oxygen, no air in space, there's actually nothing to slow down this shrapnel. So if you are close enough to trigger this explosion and blow up the Death Star, the shrapnel is probably going to destroy your own ship. Not so much the shockwave, but that shrapnel is not going to slow down until it hits into something. And that's something that also wouldn't look pretty. So it's also something that movies often omit. And it's just like one of many pet peeves I have about space, but the explosions is always one that bothers me a lot.
So Deanna, if I'm understanding this right, and I get very distracted looking at the comments and stuff, I'm a bad multitasker, but so like you would potentially be in a situation where you're actually really inhibited from like firing on the other ship or something because it would be really likely to damage you as well, correct?
And I would say so, yes. If you're close enough to actually be able to blow up a ship, then the debris from that ship is going to spread out in every direction, traveling ridiculously fast. So that is going to do some amount of damage.
So maybe like expanding into space, because you always hear people be like, oh, there's going to be all these interstellar wars, or just this assumption that war would just get upscaled, but there would actually be potentially pretty strong pressure against that, right? Because it would be difficult.
It would be counterproductive. I also think explosives are not the way to go in space. Probably the most effective weapon that they actually do in some of the Star Wars films is to push things into each other, because spaceships notoriously cannot slow down properly. The whole thing you see in the typical dogfights of spaceships flipping over very quickly is physically impossible because they don't have anything to slow them down. They'd actually need thrusters to really stop them, spin them, and then thrust in the opposite direction. That would be too slow, of course. So nothing can slow down and nothing can turn around. So one of the best ways if you wanted to destroy a spaceship would be push it into something else, because it would be very hard for it to actually slow itself down to avoid a collision. And they do that in some of the newer Star Wars films where they just do a cascade of ships crashing into one another. And that's actually a lot more effective than explosions would be in space.
Or maybe they'll move into some sort of biowarfare or something like that, like send viruses over to the other ship.
Yeah, like they did in Independence Day and just upload it to the other person's computer. And I think there's so many things wrong with Independence Day. But yeah.
Thanks, Tom, for the Super Heart Award. Who wants to jump in next?
David, do you want to take more of the space ones?
yeah, while we're on the theme.
It's interesting. I'm kind of curious now. You got me thinking about the Death Star blowing up and the debris flying. The Death Star is so massive, though, that it would be slowed down by one force. That's gravity. Its own gravity. But anyway.
Could it collapse the
and there are shock waves. There is debris, so there are shock waves. I mean, there are shock waves in supernova explosions and so forth. So, but like I said, there's nothing to propagate that in. So of course, I'm not going to hear anything unless the person makes explosion noises as he's watching the battle or something. I guess the other thing, I think going back to Star Trek, I think we mentioned, this. I mentioned it, but you go to all these worlds, of course, look a little too Earth-like, and I know there's a practical reason for that because you're filming on the Earth, and the gravity's a little too the same, with a few exceptions. When somebody goes to the moon, people know the moon's gravity is lower. They saw it for themselves, so they get that right usually. But you go to Mars, for example, there are a couple of series on about Mars, and they don't make much of an effort to lower the gravity on Mars. I know it's not going to be super different, but it's going to be different. It's going to be not the same as the Earth. So all these planets always have the same sort of gravity and concerns and with that. These planets are maybe a little too Earth-like. And again,
sky color.
Huh? What?
And they will have the same sky color.
Sky color, yeah. And again, as you go further, as time has gone on, and special effects have gotten easier. They do change that. They'll make different skies and so forth. But you go early on, it's all like, this looks exactly like the Earth because it is on the Earth. Okay, anyway. They all look human too. And of course, they all speak English, but to me, that's just the universal translator playing a role there. And I realize the lips would not sync up, but that gets kind of silly looking. Now you're thinking about Japanese karate films, so I can understand why they wouldn't want to go that far. I think Dune went that far. They didn't have the lips sync up. But you start thinking this is like a Japanese karate film and all that. So So I understand kind of why they do that as well. So yeah, I like I said, I'm the great rationalizer because I love the shows, so I try to root for them. Talking about vacuum and the expanser, the one example I want to give before we went on air, but so you got two people, they're on like top of a ship, and their communicators don't work, so they can't talk to each other. So what they did is they get close together and butt heads, so that the air through their bubble can hit the glass, which goes through their glass and goes into the air. So they can communicate that way. They can propagate sound through that way, which I thought was very clever, and probably would work. So they basically literally are touching each other and they can talk to each other. So I thought that was really well done on that. So sometimes they're clever and so forth, but like I said, there are always these little things that kind of get you. Maneuverability of the spacecraft is tough. That is really tough because we're used to airplanes. And you're right, you'd have to have thrusters and so forth. And there's also a thing that I'm glad Star Trek at least thought of it. If you're like going really fast, you start at 0 and you go really fast, warp speed, or just even impulse, right? You're going to be thrown back by the acceleration right into the wall, splat. So Star Trek has these inertial dampeners to take care of that. Now, I don't know how that works, but at least they're concerned with that. They have to do something to take away the acceleration. Otherwise, you're going to just die. If you're going to speed up anything faster than a few G. So it's unrealistic, but it's something at least they're concerned with, and they're trying to take care of it as best they can. So
yeah, I'm with you, David, in that I will go through tremendous like mental loopholes and cartwheels to try to like justify what they're doing in the show. I'm like on the side of the sci-fi show, even when I'm like, that's not how evolution works, but I'm like, oh, but we wouldn't have this cool story without it. And I mean, there's another cool Star Trek Voyager episode to redeem them a little bit, where they like combine two people into one person, which is
Tuvix, yeah.
Tuvix, yeah, even more egregious than devolving into a lizard, perhaps. Yeah. But like, you're rewarded like with a big like emotional and sort of like philosophical like payoff and questioning that you wouldn't have been able to have otherwise.
Exactly. And I have to say the actor who played Tuvix did a really good job. That really made it even, I think, more believable, if you will. But yeah, the little ethics thing at the end was really good. So yeah.
Yeah. For those who, just as a plug, in that episode, it becomes a question between like this new person has formed as a result of two other people merging, and so you have to decide, like, is this one person, are we going to destroy this one person's life so we can get the two original people back who can't speak for themselves right now, or are we going to let this one person who's here right now keep living and sort of justify it as the other two people have already, in a sense, died to create this new person who doesn't want to go away, who doesn't want to stop existing. So it's really interesting. But I will say this is like, my favorite thing about science fiction is that it can create a way to make us confront sort of ethical dilemmas or complicated questions in a way that it creates a little bit of emotional distance between like what we're observing and in the show and what happens in real life. So for example, if you wanted to talk about like immigration or something, you're going to be less biased and be able to think about it more rationally if you're thinking of like some alien immigrant species that you have no idea versus like immigrants that you like maybe already have biases about, or like, if it's like people coming into your country or what. So I think that's the strength of sci-fi, although it is not related to my field of science, at least.
Yeah.
I do agree with what you're all saying there. You have to give the shows the benefit of the doubt sometimes. I mean, I have a lot of pet peeves, but my approach is to always just assume that the show takes place in a parallel universe where the laws of physics are slightly different. And then as long as they're consistent within the same universe they set up, I'm fine with it. What I don't like is when a show or movie establishes some rules, and then 5 minutes later or the next episode, they forget and establish a whole set of different rules. Like, you can be in a whole different universe with different laws of physics, but the laws of physics shouldn't change every day.
Yeah, I mean that's bad storytelling, right? It's not even unique to sci-fi. Yeah, 100%. I mean, so I also was very, very privileged in having some really good literature teachers growing up, and one of them was a sci-fi nerd, and he said, if you're gonna read sci-fi like to appreciate it and not just whatever, read it for the pew pew, you have to suspend disbelief. Sci-fi is a tool, right? It's a method. You're extrapolating an idea, like totalitarianism or immigration, right? With District 9, I think that's what that movie was about, essentially, right? Global politics, genetics, in Dune, that was a huge theme in Dune, which will bring me to a pet peeve. But as a scientist, right, it is a slightly different exercise, because you can't help, but it tickles your funny bone, right? You're just like, you could have gotten this right. And so here are some of my pet peeves. Again, I do not think it makes this bad storytelling. I just think, there's no reason to have done it this way other than it being convenient. So the first is, there are movies like Limitless. There's another one with not Charlize Theron, Scarlett Johansson, I forget, Lucy, where the premise is that they receive some kind of treatment. I think in both cases, actually, it's a drug. Limitless was that guy with the long hair from Philly. Can't remember his name. Anyways, the guy from The Hangover. But anyways, so they take
Bradley
some kind
Cooper.
of, yeah, Bradley Cooper. Thank you. They take some kind of magical pill, or they receive some kind of magical treatment, and all of a sudden their capabilities are magically amplified. They're more intelligent. They have better energy. Their memory is much better. They're faster. They're more charismatic, right? All of these things are amplified, and that is unrealistic, right? But there's nothing. It doesn't break the laws of physics to suggest that if we could intervene in human neurobiology at a granular level with a more completed and mature neuroscience, you could modify a lot about your disposition, your memory, certainly with the integration of technology. And so it is just this really simple plot device. And part of the reason that it became, the reason it's unrealistic is that there's not going to be a single molecule that is comprehensive enough in its pharmacology. It won't interact with enough of the brain to target all of these disparate components of human consciousness and behavior, right? And so, it's a simple plot mechanism, right? It's just, you took this pill, and then boom, we move on, right? Done. But the main reason that it became a pet peeve for me is that I must have gotten that question 9 trillion times, if that's a real number. Maybe Deanna can help me with that. But literally, like after those movies came out, every other question was like, is NZT real? Like, oh, what about Limitless? And it's like, oh my gosh. but I very gladly engaged the topic. Another one is from my favorite movie, The Matrix, which you can. It's kind of dark. I just snagged that image. I could have improved, optimized it. But in any case, jacking it. Okay. And so I think The Matrix is the most vivid expression of this concept of humans interfacing with technology through this very, very simple port, right? Literally a port. There are other films that take different approaches. There's Johnny Mnemonic had a slightly different approach. Neuromancer, which is a book, in the Sprawl trilogy, doesn't really take this kind of an approach. It's much more of like a modular approach, which I think is actually more realistic. Recursion, which is the book that I recommended at the end, again, very simple book, but really it's like candy. I think takes perhaps an even more sophisticated approach to the whole, like, this is the perfect drug that like just one molecule solves everything. It's more nanotechnology with competent little robots, right? Which is close. I mean, there is a technology on which some people are working. In fact, some of the former, I think, board members of Neuralink, Elon Musk's brain-computer interface company, working on something called neural dust, which would essentially be remote electrodes that are not microscopic, but very, very small, that would sort of decorate parts of your brain. So okay, that's a little bit more realistic. When it comes to just jacking in, which is what we're all used to. It's how we plug in our phones to charge them. It's how we plug in things that are no longer Bluetooth, or things that aren't Bluetooth yet, right? It is very intuitive, and it's also, I think there's actually something very primitive about that whole interface in humans. Different topic. But the problem is that when it comes to the human brain, the idea that you're just going to have this guitar cable shoved into one part of your brain, particularly the back of the brain, which is like, it's really just vision, and unless that that thing is huge, and it like really goes almost to the front of your brain. But then you're literally, unless you enlarge the skull, unless you do something to the geometry of the skull, you are necessarily just digging a canal through the human brain, through some very important parts of the human brain, I might add. And so that is just fundamentally unrealistic. Again, suspension of disbelief. It's my favorite movie, but they could have done it in a more sophisticated way. In their defense, and I'll finish after this, the movie did come out in, I think, 1999. So this was before even the technology that I used for my PhD was a glint in Carl D. Seurat's eye, right? In the scientist, and Ed Boyden, in the scientists who invented them, the technology's eyes, right? So even a highly competent neuroscientist probably couldn't have articulated a more sophisticated version of this. But if we were to make the Matrix tomorrow, which they are making a new Matrix, a little bit anxiety provoking, but you could do something a little bit more sophisticated, and it wouldn't take that long, and it could look really effing cool because it would involve fiber optics, and it would make a bunch of neuroscientists squee out of joy because, I do that in the lab too. Hey, mom, you say that I just play with mice all day. Well, I'm doing the Matrix to the mice. So anyways, I'll stop there. I could go on and on, obviously. Gattaca, the genetic predestination, that whole concept. One of my favorite movies. Again, suspension of disbelief. It's a plot mechanism. But that is a fundamental and frankly dangerous over history understanding of genetics, right? That is something that we call biological essentialism, which has been associated with, I think, arguably widely recognized to be one of the greatest atrocities in human history, the Holocaust. And so, and it is inaccurate. It's an inaccurate understanding of the relationship between human behavior, human potential, and genetics. And so, but it's a good extrapolation because it does reveal the fundamental point of the movie, of course, is that we shouldn't obey, that it is invalid, that we shouldn't view human genetics as our destiny. But in any case, so, okay, I'll stop there.
No, that was a lot of really interesting and good stuff. And the last point you made really reminds me. Oh, and by the way, thank you, Bo, for the award. We appreciate it. The last point you made, though, about like essentialism and like your like genetic predeterminedness. This is related to my sort of second big pet peeve with evolution is when like things just on other planets, even basically the intelligent life evolves to be some human looking thing. And obviously, David mentioned just like with the planetscapes, this is a practical thing. Aliens are played by like people in makeup, especially in older sci-fi. But for example, like in Star Trek Next Generation, they tried to explain it as, there used to be this intelligent race of aliens that looked kind of humanoid, and they seeded their DNA on all these different planets because they realized there wasn't any other life in the universe and they thought there should be life. And so we learn that all of the different aliens in Star Trek are related to each other, actually. The Klingons and the Vulcans and humans. And it seems innocuous at first, but what you're implying is that like the best thing to be is human, and like being human or humanoid is like the most evolved or most highly evolved form of something. And I mean, it's not true because, if we look at all the life on Earth, humans have been evolving for just as long as a tree has been evolving. Like no one species is like more optimized or whatever than another. And so I think when you imply that like, they put this DNA there and then it's like its destiny was to become like human, I think it's a way of kind of putting people above other species in a sense, like in just a really fundamental evolution sense. It's just not true,
So Georgia, like, can we play with this? Can we play with this topic a little bit? So sure. There is this question that I've come across fairly recently in evolution that why is it that a lot of the Triassic dinosaurs, critters, look a lot like animals that are around today, even though they aren't evolutionarily or genetic. There is no genetic direct. Obviously, ultimately there is, but they didn't descend, right? The animals today that look like them didn't descend from them. And then and there was this concept. I can't remember who it was. Gould maybe put it out there that like if humans didn't evolve, right, then there probably would be something that looks a lot like humans that would evolve. Based off of the selective pressures of the environment, that there would probably be something that has some, sophisticated manual dexterity, perhaps, not very strong, not very weak, but, socially collaborating as their solution to not being like a gorilla or not being like a chimp, or bonobo, like really, really strong, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I mean, I fundamentally, I agree with the point you're making that like it's very anthropocentric, and it is unfair, and it's also inaccurate. But that concept has always been appealing to me because it does rationally make sense, right? The selective pressures are the selective pressures, right? Those don't change. They're almost like laws of physics. But what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, that's like a famous debate in evolution is like this idea of like if you played back the tape of if you played back the tape of evolution, would you get the same things over and over again? And I mean, there's definitely like patterns that crop up. Like there's a joke, like, why do things keep evolving into crabs? Like lots of different, there's like crabs have evolved like 5 different times, and there's even a word for it. It's like crab, it's not crabification, but it's something ridiculous.
I know the word, yeah.
Like, yeah, I mean, and yeah, so the idea is that like you can get what we call convergent evolution when you have this sort of the same thing developing again when there's similar evolutionary pressures. I don't know that I feel like a human-shaped thing that is also really social and intelligent is just like too specific, I guess, for me to buy the argument. And the idea that that we would have the same sort of set of things that would happen on different planets. Where there's very different evolutionary pressures is, yeah.
That's where I'm with you. Yeah. It's carcinization.
Carcinization. So you know better than me. I mean, this is a thing that like one of those evolution things that like the public knows better than me. I'm like, I don't care that I don't study crabs. That's
Georgia, I looked it up.
Okay.
But I knew the word existed.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, people love this crab thing though. They're like, you study evolution. Do you study crabs? Something like that. Like, no, I don't.
Yeah, once something becomes a meme, everybody knows about it.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to keep up with the memes. But before we maybe leave this topic, I do have to bring up, so Red Dwarf, the show I mentioned in the beginning, that's like, and I know Deanne and David, you said you like this show too. Again, it's like a British sci-fi comedy. The guy gets frozen in time, right? And all the humans are dead. But at the beginning of the show, he smuggled a cat on board. And his pet cat, when he wakes up from stasis, is a humanoid cat, basically. His cat has, given, this is another example of what we were just talking about. Given enough time, yes, there's the Red Dwarf picture. Given enough time. So the cat is the guy on the far left in that picture. Yeah. It was a black cat. It evolved into a black guy. But like, it makes no sense because if you look, the cats have like white skin under their fur usually. But anyways, so like he wakes up and his cat, the ancestor of his cat is a human, which is very exciting. And I'm going to actually play a clip real quick because I have a clip pulled up of the character of the cat. Give me 1 minute.
Teddy J. Jules, Teddy Jules.
Okay. And then, so here's the clip from Red Dwarf.
This is mine, that's mine, all this is mine, I'm claiming all this as mine. Except for that bit. I don't want that bit. But all the rest of this is mine. Hey, this has been a good day. I've eaten 5 times, I've slept 6 times.
Okay, so
It's still funny though.
The cat he's shaped like a human, but he has many cat tendencies still. For example, he has a little cologne bottle and he likes to spray things with it and claim them as his. Just like if you have a pet cat, it likes to rub on things and put its scent around and stuff. The cat is a very fastidious dresser. And so I I give Red Dwarf a pass on this things turning into humans because, first of all, it's a comedy show, and so the threshold for reality is just lower. But second of all, they actually have a better explanation, better than anyone else, for why an animal would evolve into something that looks like a cat or into something that looks like a human. And their explanation is that the cat people have been evolving on a spaceship. They're stuck on this spaceship. That's the only place where they live. And so they've been evolving in an environment that's created entirely for humans. And so therefore there were these evolutionary pressures over time that led the cat to become more human-like. I don't know, take it or leave it, but Red Dwarf surprisingly does things evolving into a human the best, I think.
At least they try to offer an explanation. I think one of the shows, speaking of the good things that shows have done, Stargate actually addressed that pretty nicely, because Stargate, they travel to hundreds of worlds, and every time they meet humans. And at some point, it comes out that actually some humans were kind of stolen from Earth like 2,000 years ago and put on different planets. And that's their explanation. Also, somehow all of the humans speak English on all the other worlds, which does annoy me a bit. But at least they give an explanation for why they all look like humans.
Yeah,
Bit
that makes a
far-fetched,
lot
but
of sense. Oh, thanks,
at
David.
least they try.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, David, for putting the link up. Yeah, Abyss, what are your, you haven't spoken in a while, what are your pet peeves or things you love?
When it comes to movies, I think my pet peeves will be if they try to ground it in some kind of scientific jargon, right? So that's easy for people to lose people, or at least like to make them believe that this is an ever-present danger, even though it was set up as a plot line. That's where I have issues with. I mean, I don't have much issues with kind of like reimagining a different world where laws of physics are kind of flipped in a way. You can easily justify that to kind of justify some kind of fictional, anthropomorphized fictional world where things just simply happen. And I think like I was very harsh when the movie 2012 came out, and their premise was actually severely flawed, and Deanna probably can attest to this. And the idea is that you have these chargeless particles called neutrinos, that are essentially been emitted from any kind of stellar object, or any any system that goes through a fusion and whatnot. So we're completely bombarded with neutrinos all the time. They barely interact with the matter that we have. So the premise of the movie was, what if those neutrinos start to interact with the Earth's core, and start to heat up the planet from inside out, and you have these the crust kind of shifting apart, and that's basically the premise of the movie. But we have I mean, as far as I know, and we have like Deanna and David here, who are certified physicists, can attest that you don't neutrinos don't interact that much. I mean, capturing them is a very, very difficult task. In fact, that's why like there were probably not well studied, if I'm not mistaken. And I think there is Fermilab is actually undergoing some kind of remodeling of some of the particle accelerators that they used to have, into repurposing that to measure neutrinos, or to understand neutrinos in more depth. And I think they call it the Dune experiment. So yeah, these are some of the things that I have issues with. And to Ian's point, even though I really, really, really love The Matrix, and I still watch it probably like once a year, to kind of propel myself to really understand what's really going on. And once I start to understand how the brain works, that seemed to be like a bit of a stretch for me as well. And I was trying to justify, like, okay, maybe they had like those wires and hooks that basically grew up with the person, because like they were there since the time of inception. So in a way that the brain itself was not wired as if it were, if there was no like intervention using some artificial mechanisms, right? So at least you can justify that. But the whole jacking in kind of thing, like really doesn't make sense. I mean, it's an excellent plot point. Don't get me wrong, but it there are some kind of like loopholes into that that we can probably nitpick. And Ian mentioned about limitless, and that was one of the things as well. Like there's no like magical drug that kind of puts you into this you know super brilliant stuff. Like there are, I mean, our brain is not does not really work that well once I start to understand that. But there are some pretty much nuanced uh, ideas. Like for example, I have my background is also in chemical engineering. That there are some scenes, like for example, and like one that I can recall right now is RoboCop, that a person was kind of dropped into this acid vat, and like when it was hit by a car, it's just like splattered as if it was a watermelon. So that doesn't really happen. You get to have like acid burns, and you don't really like interact, like behave that way. But I understand it's just like for an amusement. And of course, like the whole idea that Murphy's brain was taken away and put into like cyberized kind of form, and where he was pretty much acting like a robot. That's also very contentious. But yeah, I mean, we can probably nitpick about some of the ideas, but uh, if I'm not like taking so much time, the one movie that actually made me rethink about the human brain was, like I said, Arrival. I'm coming like circling back to that because, we know about the whole idea of like brain being sort of like plastic in a way. It's we are making new memories. Whenever we're rehearsing even old memories, we're making new ones. But we know like there's this kind of dynamism when it comes to the brain. But what if the brain itself can actually encode a language that by itself is able to tell you about the future? So that goes to that's actually like it's kind of stretch your mind, right? I mean, I mean, we think like we're kind of encumbered by the limits of language. So what if we can transcend that, and what if the language itself can actually impose something upon us? And this is kind of close to how numbers are conceived in the minds, or like in the figments of different people speaking different languages. Like for example, if you speak Mandarin and Japanese, probably Korean, you might have easy way of calculating things because it's deeply ingrained in the language itself, when in fact you don't have that sort of easiness when it comes to other languages. So yeah, these are like some few things that really made me think. And of course, like there's an Interstellar that people usually quote, of course, like with the exception of the last scene, visualizing as to how a black hole would look like up close was very well done. And they actually brought a physicist for that as well. So yeah, I mean, we can talk about individual movies, but generally, I think like I like the entertainment part. I don't consider movies to be like literate objects that people can take notes from. They're generally inspirations. In fact, the whole idea of brain computer interface was, if I'm not mistaken, was inspired by Star Wars when they saw Luke Skywalker's artificial hand. In fact, like one of my former professors who's actively working in that research was inspired by that. So yeah, I mean, we can nitpick like which movie has got it right or wrong, but generally, if they're ground in some fictional idea, that's great. But if they quote something scientific, at least get the science right. That's my that's
I,
that's
I
essentially
think
what I
that
have.
I think that's a really important point there from Abyss, and it reminds me of the very unfortunate book and movie by Dan Brown, The Angels and Demons, where the whole plot revolves around having an antimatter bomb. This has led to me get the question so many times: is antimatter going to destroy the universe? No, that's really, really not how antimatter works. I completely agree with the bit. When they try to use existing scientific concepts to explain something, then it gets bad. Like the idea that neutrinos could be harmful to us in some way when there are 60 billion of them passing through us every second is ridiculous. There was also a show that did that recently. What was it called? It was really bad. Really, I didn't even make it to the end. But at some point, the ship is traveling through a cloud of dark matter. They have the idea we don't even know what's going to happen. It's like, okay, sure, we don't know what's going to happen. And then they suddenly start getting laser beams shot at them from random places, and their excuse is maybe it's the dark matter that just turns into light when it's heavily condensed. And that just hurt me on so many levels. Like, I think that was the point where I just turned off the show and walked away. It's like, come on, you can't do that. Just pick a random concept that doesn't exist.
I think it's valuable to acknowledge for any other scientists who might be watching this, or for anybody here that is unfamiliar. There are groups where you can like sign up to be a scientific consultant for the entertainment industry. It's like the Science Entertainment Exchange or something like that. Yeah, if you type that into Google, you'll get there. I suspect that it's negligently underused. But there is also, just FYI, there is also a system where you can sign up to do the same for reporters, for journalists, called HARO, HARO. And so journalists will be like, I need to know about, the effect of, there's a lot of opioid questions that come up. And so it is a way for us to at least keep some of the pet peeves at bay. But Deanna, I have to ask you before, because I know it's late where you are, before you leave. So I know that Kip Thorne was the consultant for Interstellar, and he's like a legit scientist, right?
No prize winner.
Yeah, so that's pretty legit as far as scientists go. I've heard that's a pretty fancy prize. But so I love that movie. And at the end, of course, there's the black hole scene. So give us a sense of how much was he? Oh, there you go. Yeah. So give us a sense, how much was he being playful? And to what extent was he being playful, and to what extent was that pure and complete fantasy? Understanding that spaghettification and all that kind of stuff would happen. But.
Yeah, so the good thing about black holes is that we don't have any answer for what happens if you fall into a black hole, because nothing can escape, which means anything that falls into a black hole cannot send any information back. So there is room to play there, that once you fall into a black hole, pretty much anything could happen. But of course, there is a range of possibilities, and the whole thing of traveling back in time to your daughter's bookcase is probably very much on the low end of likeliness. But that movie does do very accurate depictions of black holes. They actually were pioneering a technique to visualize black holes that then produced a scientific paper based on the visualizations in Interstellar. So the people consulting on the movie and helping design these black holes actually had a realization during the filming process of, actually, this helps us understand black holes more. So the visualization of black hole was brilliant. The time dilate was brilliantly done. It was very well executed, very well explained. There were a few things where they took a bit of liberty, but it was mostly good. Spaghettification is a thing that happens around black holes. If you were to jump into a black hole head first, you would gradually get spaghettified. The tidal forces would rip you apart. That is a common exercise to set in a general relativity course, is to make the students calculate how far away from the black hole could you still survive, and at which point would the tidal forces destroy you. So that is accurate. Then what happens when you fall into a black hole at that point is pure guesswork. That's where they have the opportunity to play. What we think would happen most likely is it would be so dense you would just be condensed into this big matter thing. Not sure what would happen to your information. The whole thing of a black hole being a portal to somewhere else in the universe is not likely. We can't disprove it, but it's on the very low end of being a likely scenario. So I was very much rooting for the science in that movie up until that point.
So my favorite part of that movie, actually, I love the whole thing, but was actually the water planet that was orbiting, I think, a neutron star, a black hole. That was just so cool. Once you sort of figured out what was happening, that it was just that significant gravity. That was beautiful. I'm sorry, Abyss. I know you wanted to. I was just fanboying a little bit.
No, it's fine. I was gonna probably suggest that maybe when they get close to the black hole, that black holes generally are considered to be one of the coldest areas in the universe. given that even though like they have a cushion disk and whatnot, but yeah, I guess like that would be a missed opportunity where they would kind of struggle against like their engines like freezing out because like I said, like I mean, if it's like a supermassive black hole that you have, the temperature kind of like I mean the temperature dropping exponentially. So yeah, I think like that's probably like a missed opportunity that they should have considered.
Yeah, it's something else they could have done. In terms of accurate depiction of time dilation, there was actually an episode of Doctor Who in season 10 that they did that pretty well, where they had a spaceship that was so tall and had so many decks, it was kind of falling into a black hole. And the bottom decks experienced time much differently to the top decks. So the people on the higher decks experience like 2 minutes, and for the people in the bottom decks, 50 years have gone past within the same spaceship. And this was actually pretty cool. I thought that was a time where Doctor Who plays very loose with the rules of physics, but that was a time where they did a pretty good job.
Oh, if there's like one, single, like a single plugin that I have to make, The Martian was pretty darn accurate because it was made in consultancy with some of NASA astronauts, and of course, like there are some scenes that really didn't make sense, like having that storm and everything, and I was actually fortunate enough to actually ask the question of like the effect of microgravity being discarded from The Martian, and I was actually I asked them that if that's intentional or is that like that would have made like a very excellent plot line. It's sort of like a plot twist in a way where Mark Watney, the main character, has to kind of battle the elements of Mars and also the microgravity, which inadvertently causes bone loss and bone mineral density loss and among other things.
I agree with. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's a shame that we don't have, it's a shame we don't have a biologist here who's more familiar in general with like physiology, like anatomy type stuff. Yeah, speaking of bone density.
I can double with that because I did have some publications as to how age and height and body mass index actually affected the bone structure and bone remodeling process. So I'm not an expert, but yeah, I can probably talk about that a little.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, I didn't realize that. That's awesome. What were you going to say, Deanna?
I was going to say that The Martian did a lot of things very well. As Abyss was saying, some of the science is really well done. One thing I don't like about The Martian, which is also a common theme in a lot of space shows, is the spacesuit. I mean, currently, even the pretty spacesuits you get on the new SpaceX missions, it takes several hours to get in and out of those, and it's usually a two-person job. You don't just go and put on your own spacesuit and go out for a walk around your Martian planet 3 or 4 times a day. Right? And how they depict spacesuits, of course, we have to assume it's very futuristic, and by then spacesuits have improved. But it's like they're just changing into their gym clothes. Right? It's like, oh, I'll just put on my gym clothes and head out for a hike around Mars. Yeah, that's a several-hour process to make sure you're in that suit is perfectly sealed, vacuum sealed. So I think spacesuits is something that a lot of sci-fi shows miss the mark on. But they take some liberties, yeah.
So there's another interesting parallel to some of the topics that we brought up, and one of the topics you brought up, Georgia, which is that like sort of spontaneous evolution kind of phenomenon, right? Where like something is treated in some way, and then you go from a human to something else, so in Dune, again, my favorite book series, the sort of the what is it, a MacGuffin? I think, is that the term for just like a thing that solves everything? That's just sort of like the explanation for everything. I might be misapplying that word, but in Dune, let's just pretend that that's what MacGuffin means. Suspend your disbelief a little bit. The MacGuffin is called melange, right? It's the spice. The spice must flow, and it is this thing that not only induces longevity, like very significant, almost near mortality. It also makes you smarter. It also makes your eyes blue, like glowing blue, which is, I thought, nice little touch, pretty cool. And it has a bunch of others. It's sort of pseudo-euphoric. But it also, when taken in massive doses perpetually, can turn a human into what they call a navigator, which is this sort of floating, like, octopus-like creature that has, like, omnipotence. And so they call them navigators because they can see, like, they can plot out, like, travel through interstellar space, right? So you don't crash into a black hole, for example. And so, but it is a human that is given melange, which is just this, essentially a plant. Well, it's not a plant. No, it's essentially a byproduct of a giant worm. Anyways, I'm getting a little too into details. But yeah, it was another just sort of like, this one thing answers all the questions that you have about how I'm writing this story. Interestingly, however, and again, suspend disbelief. Okay, fine. Melange, it's a metaphor for oil. It's a metaphor for the desire to live forever, for power, and all this kind of stuff. That's what it is, right, in the book. But interestingly, Frank Herbert, the author of the original 5 Dune books, spent some time as like a conservationist, and he was like a tour guide for like some kind of like national park or something like that. Like, he had some exposure to some of the topics. Climate change was like a big theme for him, and this was written decades ago. And so I give him enough credit for like introducing all these themes way before their time, you know, in terms of like popular culture. Enough credit to forgive him for just saying like, oh, Melange did that. Like, oh, how do humans travel from galaxy to galaxy? Oh, it's the melange, it's spice. How do humans live forever? Oh, it's melange, it's spice. You know, what drives all human politics? Melange. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think there was another, I can't remember now, but like another old sci-fi book where there's like some drug, I think, that they give the navigator to make them just able to pilot like the ship really well. And embarrassingly now I'm realizing that's like the spore drive in Star Trek Discovery, which I'd prefer not to talk about that because it's bad. But it's just a like fungal spore like space travel thing happening.
That is, you know, it's a critique. So much sci-fi cribs from Dune. Like, you know, when Star Wars came out, like there was like I think there was a lawsuit, or there was going to be a lawsuit. It was just like, dude, this is Dune, but with like animatronic animals and like a little bit goofier. Or did I say Star Trek? Star Wars. If I said, I meant Star Wars.
I think you said Star Wars.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And then what you're describing sounds literally like quite exactly part of Dune. But hey, I don't know. Maybe that came out first. I doubt it. I bet Dune came out earlier.
Yeah. Mel has a question to the panel. How true do you feel the time-space reality depictions in Interstellar were portrayed? Sorry if this has already been discussed, but we've mentioned Interstellar several times, and it certainly has like a reputation for being like a really scientifically like rigorous movie. But I think this is the part of the discussion where I have to do something that I've been avoiding and admit that I haven't seen Interstellar. I'm always like 15 years behind the times. I like watch things that came out forever ago. Finally, once I've been like, people have been talking about this for 10 years, it must really be good. I'll put the time to watching it now. But yeah, if other people who have seen Interstellar would like to comment on that specifically.
Yeah, I think it's worth watching. It's a bit of a slow film. I've only seen it once, which was at the cinema, and I've never bothered watching it again. But I think it's good to watch once. Yeah, the science is very accurate right up until the guy falls into a black hole. Up until then, the science is good. The whole time dilation is good. The depiction of black holes is good. I like that they don't show black holes as being 2-dimensional, but they actually show it as being a 3-dimensional object. So there's a lot of good science in Interstellar up until the end. That's the short version. And yeah, when we were just talking about spaceships and giving the navigator a drug and stuff like that, it reminded me of Farscape, which is still one of my favorite ever sci-fi shows, and I don't think it gets the attention that it deserves because Farscape was brilliant. And one of the key concepts there is that most of the ships are actually sentient beings, and they choose to go. They're Leviathans, and they choose to navigate through space. And the pilot is kind of fused into the spaceship. So the pilot and the spaceship have this neuronal connection, which again, it's like they're just plugged in, but they're literally fused into the ship. And I thought that was really interesting. Of course, it gets complicated when the leviathans start giving birth, and then it's like your spaceship has just had a baby spaceship, then it gets weird. But it was kind of cool, this whole concept of the ships actually being living beings.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Star Trek has used that a couple times. I recently read a book called The Stars Yet something, The Stars Above Us, The Stars Yet Discovered, where it's about the AI in ships has basically progressed to the point where the ships are considered living beings too. And like at one point they have to go into a ship that has like broken down, the ship is dead, and they're like extremely uncomfortable, like walking around in like what's essentially like the dead body of the ship. Yeah. Revolution says something about the issue they never show is the massive lead water melange shielding you'd need when in space. 100 people go to Mars, some would inevitably die from exposure to DNA destroying particles in space. Yeah, this is something I never thought of until I watching David, some of your cast. I was like, oh, I never thought about how much radiation there is in space that we're like protected from.
Yeah, that's a big issue, just for practical space travel. I keep thinking, though, they're going to solve that. They have shields or whatever, so, like that. But in real space travel, if you want to go to Mars, that's going to be a big concern.
And on Earth, just to be clear for everybody, like the Earth's atmosphere is what's protecting us.
Yeah, magnetic field as well. Yeah. So.
Okay. Cool. Well, okay, I have a question. And again, audience members, you're encouraged to ask questions, but I have a question for Ian and anyone else, I guess, who feels to chime in on telepathy. There's so many telepathic aliens. It's a really commonly used plot device in science fiction. Bo had a comment that we haven't talked about Firefly enough. Firefly has, well, I don't want to give anything. Gosh, spoilers.
I just recently rewatched Firefly. I'm happy to discuss Firefly any day.
Okay, yeah, there's telepathic characters in that, we'll just say, and Deanna, even you were saying your namesake from Star Trek is a telepathic character. So Ian, what I guess, like, can you discuss, like, is there a realistic way that would happen? Like, could there be alien species where they have telepathy between each other, and would it be likely that something else could read our brains, like cross-species telepathy?
So, I mean, I think probably the most realistic. Well, let's start with, could humans ever be telepathic, right? So, could we communicate without any speech, but also without seeing each other? Because we communicate a lot. There's a reason that some people prefer to watch a video rather than just listen to the speech from the video, right? We communicate a lot through our movements, our gesticulations, which I do I'm over the top with my gesticulations. Now I'm going to be self-conscious about that. Our facial expressions and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of communication that happens via those venues. And then the speech is layered on top and gives us some granularity, some precision. And so I would imagine that, so for a human to be technically telepathic, they have to be able to be like in separate rooms or completely invisible to each other, right? And so I think, the closest way for us to do that, the easiest, simplest way, would be through technological, integration, right? Some kind of like wireless transmission of data directly derived from, neural activity. And there's nothing that is not magical. I mean, wouldn't break any of the laws of physics. It would just be extraordinarily difficult, complicated, and it's not going to happen certainly within my lifetime. Some of you are a bit younger than I am, so perhaps in yours, but so that's how I see it happening for humans. And when it comes to could there be an alien species that evolved the capability of communicating in the same exact way with the same limitations, right? They can't see each other, they're not touching each other, etc. I don't see a way of biology being able to generate a thing that interacts with the electromagnetic spectrum with that part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, would it break the laws of physics for that to happen? Theoretically, yeah, right? You could have a Bluetooth protein, right? That, like, just like our photoreceptors are sensitive to the visible light spectrum on the electromagnetic spectrum, right? That's how you see everything you're seeing right now. Theoretically, you could have a protein that's sensitive to Bluetooth. So, like you could, and I'm just saying Bluetooth, that's just another part of the electromagnetic spectrum, or, radio, or, but I suspect that for a lot of the parts of the EM spectrum, that would be very disruptive to biology, because you'd just be bombarded constantly with stuff, and it would take a lot for the precision necessary to like not just be, like what was it when Superman started hearing all the voices around him? It was just like driving him nuts. Okay, so however, and so possible. I do think it's less likely that an alien species would evolve to be able to derive our inner dialogue, our inner consciousness, from a completely a literal alien species. That's a little bit too far for me to really see evolution, even in the most far-fetched premise, actually producing. However, I could imagine, right, a form of communication that perhaps doesn't satisfy our limitations on what qualifies as telepathy, but to us, if we were watching, it would look like telepathy, right? So you could have organisms that communicate via the dispersal of compounds, very rapid dispersal of compounds that are extraordinarily selective to the species, right? It's the only species on that planet, whatever, that evolved, that has a receptor for a certain molecule, and you're just like, right? And they pick up, complex emotional states, or, whatever. It would be some kind of mishmash of compounds. I could see that. It wouldn't be very efficient because it'd be very slow, but I could see that. I could also see very, very, complicated gestural communication there's no speech involved, but they would have to see each other, sort of like American Sign Language, which is a very robust language that, enables people who, their auditory system is unavailable to them, to communicate, in very sophisticated ways.
So maybe if like the signs for that were very subtle and humans didn't know what were going on, it would seem like telepathy to us, but really they just have like a very secret like signaling system.
Georgia, I mean, I cannot help but keep bringing up Dune. I mean, and that is, how do you know somebody's a fan of Dune? Because they keep bringing it up. And so in Dune, the Bene Gesserit, which is this order, they are the eugenicists, frankly, this order of exclusively females, interestingly, female eugenicist order, pseudo-religious, and they communicate that way with like very, very subtle you can't see my hands, but that's the point. Very, very subtle hand gestures that convey. It's like a full, robust language, and they're communicating like subtle political concepts, right? And so like I could imagine that, if you're looking at a freaking heptapod from Arrival, their tentacles are moving around, you have no idea what the hell they're doing, right? But of course they spurt out those little circles of complexity, right? And that's their language. But like, I could imagine that appearing like telepathy. And so I could imagine some version, or maybe even some combination of chemoreception mixed with visual. It's that language, that gestural language, would be a visual language essentially, mixed with maybe even of course the probably the most likely that would appear to us, if you were watching it happen, would appear to us like telepathy, would be vocal communication, but just at a frequency that we are incapable of hearing, that we don't even notice, right? So think sort of like a dog whistle, right? Where you can hear dog whistles, by the way. I don't know why people say you can't, but where these animals have evolved some kind of auditory, something like a hair cell, but different in some physical structural way that enables them to be sensitive to certain auditory frequencies where we don't even know it's happening around us, but they're just having this whole conversation, about how it's super irritating that Ian continues bringing up Dune. And so I could imagine some combination of those, venues that would appear to us like telepathy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And Revolution says that he was telling Dr. Hooper today about a system that reads the face. So like the muscles just before you speak, prior to saying a word or a sentence, like your facial muscles like form the word or the sentence first. Humans we have so many muscles in our face, so many different fine-tuned, like very precise muscles that most other animals are lacking. And yeah, part of that is like Ian was saying, that we use our faces and expressions a lot in communication, and also like all the different muscles involved in forming the words and stuff. Our faces are like much more complicated than I think most of us suspect. I often wish that my cat had more facial muscles. Animals like cats don't have very many facial muscles. I'm like, what are you thinking? You can't even raise your eyebrows.
Are you sure you want to know what your cat is thinking though? Because it might just be, I wish I could eat you. I wish I could eat you. When can I eat you?
It depends on the cat for sure. I think the current cat I have, she's highly suspect. I don't know that either of us trust each other, but we cohabitate.
Maybe you can help your cat evolve into a humanoid cat.
That's even scarier. I don't want her to have that kind of. I don't want her to have hands and powers. I love cats. Why else would I have a cat that hates me? um, but anyways, well, I guess just this is a great time to wrap up. We've been going for a while now. I know it's very late for Deanna.
Nearly 1 a.m.
Nearly 1 a.m. Thank you so much for joining us. And
Thank
thank you also like David and Ian and Abyss. I guess, does anyone have any closing thoughts they want to get in before we go?
Sci-fi is great. There's a lot of things we don't like about it and a lot of pet peeves, but it's both an escape from reality and a reflection of reality. And I think sci-fi is my favorite genre. And I love sci-fi shows. So even though it might seem like we're highly critical, I do really enjoy them. And if anyone has recommendations for new sci-fi shows, send them my way. I'll add them to the very long list. But I'm always happy to get more shows recommended.
Yeah, I got so many excellent recommendations from this. A lot of things that it's like there's just so much great sci-fi out there that I haven't gotten around to seeing all of it, so it's good encouragement. I guess my one last plug will be for someone. I feel like a big sci-fi gap we have is Ursula Le Guin is a great sci-fi author, and she has really cool stuff in her books. One of her books, The Left Hand of Darkness, is about a species that came from humans that shifts. They can switch their gender. Like often they're kind of like non-gendered, but then during like the mating period of year, they become either male or female. And this is kind of cool because like tons of animals do that here, like snails do that, for example. So it's cool. She has like the science work like pretty legitimate behind it and stuff. So it's cool to see stuff from like the animal kingdom, other parts of the animal kingdom, I should say, applied to humans. But I felt like she should at least be mentioned in this cast. Any other closing thoughts from people?
So
I think science fiction inspires as well as I think I mean as a kid especially, just that's what I want to do. I want to be on Star Trek. I want to go to different worlds and so forth. Even I find out later how difficult or impossible that is. I don't. I get crushed by that. The reality.
Yeah, I guess David or Deanna, did sci-fi have any bearing on your career decisions?
I have to say my brother was the one I copied. But he was into science fiction. I just copied him, but no doubt, no doubt, had a great bearing.
Yeah, I think seeing people like Samantha Carter on TV, female astrophysicists taking on the world, are like amazing, amazing role model. Seeing people like her was definitely something we don't see enough of, and was definitely a nice reminder that science is for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Abyss, Ian, any closing thoughts?
yeah, so I was
Thoughts.
gonna say, sorry, I was gonna say like pretty much what David was saying, that there is an inspiration to be taken from science fiction, even though like I said, it's important to kind of tear those things apart and trying to be at least like as scientifically accurate as possible, that they can be inspiration to the next generation to kind of think, to essentially stretch their imagination as to what they want to achieve when they grow up. So that will be a very interesting part. And also, I would probably like um, the involvement of science communicators and kind of elaborating as to how the science of the movies actually work. And there are individuals, I think, like there's this astrophysicist. His name is Andy Howell. He does this thing called Science versus Cinema on YouTube, where he kind of asks filmmakers. He also, I think, like interviewed Kip Thorne at one point. So it will be kind of important for people to understand what is possible and what is not possible, given our current scientific understanding. But yeah, I think sci-fi is really imaginative, and it's largely inspiring in a way, and we should also try to kind of verify some of the claims that are made in sci-fi. Yeah, that's my closing argument. Thanks.
So for me, science fiction, I think is an extraordinarily underrated genre for understandable reasons. But I think a helpful way to think about it is that science fiction is a tool. It's just a storytelling tool to take a concept, any concept, and extrapolate it, usually using, some kind of imagination. And I think it's also, and so you can do that, right? You have an opinion about politics, about how the earth really formed, or whatever it is. You can use science fiction to explore that, what it would be like, or if you have a concept of the role of different components of our economy, like the power of big pharma, the power of oil and gas, right? Science fiction is a venue for you to discuss, to explore that, your opinions, using, and it's like it's a little bit of sugar to deliver your thoughts. But then also, I sometimes get depressed when I interact with fans of sci-fi who don't appreciate that point of it, but become overly fascinated with the candy, right? Where all they really enjoy is the pew pew, right? All they really enjoy is the power, is the domination, which is often play big roles in the stories. So I think it is kind of important to appreciate that there is more to these stories than just than just the laser guns. And then the final thing is that I think for young people in particular, it is it's healthy it's a healthy exercise to just focus on the laser guns, right? Focus, or when you're thinking about making a story, using your imagination, stretching those muscles, thinking about like, oh, what if there was this thing, that I could plug into my brain and it enabled me to fly, or, whatever. I think, and my muscles have atrophied, right? Because I've spent so much time in the real, the hard science world. And so I'm limited by that in a way, at least I think I am. Whereas for younger people, I think it can be very healthy to explore, to stretch those muscles and those cognitive muscles, and really explore your imagination. And so, yeah, I'm a lifelong fan. I'm a science fiction evangelist forever.
Yeah, I love it. A lot of great points by everyone here. So, I mean, with that, I'll say, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to all the scientists for joining us here. If you liked this and you want to hear more about different types of science, then you should subscribe to everybody here. You can tell that this has been going on a long time. I'm losing my ability to speak. But thank you, everybody, so much for coming. And yeah, subscribe to us and learn more about evolution and biology and space and neurobiology and all kinds of cool things. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us here, Georgia.
Yeah, thanks, Georgia.